Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for today's onboard engagement session focused on the technical side of submitting the RFA-2 or request for further action by insurer or employer. Let's look at today's agenda. Alrighty, so we will begin with introducing our presenters and the roles within this initiative, followed by a brief overview of the RFA-2 electronic submission options. Next, we will look at the eForm web app option via eCase. Then the team will provide a technical overview for submitting eForms using REST API and sFTP and introduce the eForm data requirements. We will then look at a draft XML submission example, and lastly, we'll cover next steps in the process and look at available resources for this transition, then take any questions you have related to the electronic submission for RFA-2. Let's get started with some introductions of the team. Today you'll hear from several project leads representing different areas of the team. Presenting today are Tim Purcell, our Chief Innovation Officer and Onboard Program Director, Caitlin Smith, Business Systems Analyst, Mike Hunter, Workers' Compensation Program Manager, Pasha Sheikh Naeem, Solutions Architect from our IT team, and Matthew Samuel, who is an eForms developer also from our IT team. So I will now pass it over to Tim Purcell, who will get things started with an overview of the electronic submission process via Onboard. Tim?
Thanks, Allie. And welcome everyone, and thank you for attending. Obviously, this is more of a technical discussion today, so we don't really have any business needs here. It's really to focus on educating our stakeholders, IT departments or folks, vendors that are interested in learning more about our REST API and our sFTP process. But we don't want to skip over the fact that your clients, your prospective clients, can also just use eCase to submit the RFA-2. Essentially what the board is doing is we're building out XML data standards for things that fall outside of the IIBC's Froy claims EDI reporting. So all of our particular forms that are really important to maintaining the life cycle of a claim, whether coming from the payer community, coming from the injured worker rep community. Every paper form that is part of that process today, we're modernizing. We're looking at making intuitive UI improvements to our eCase application by adding an eForms platform where users can simply just retrieve the case and click an eForms button and essentially be able to submit that online without any investment in technology. However, for folks that do want to go down a path whereby you can leverage some automation on your side, these new additional avenues are also going to be made available to you. That's based upon XML schema, and that's what we're really going to focus on today. But before we do that, we are going to talk a little bit about the eForms web app. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin Smith, and she'll walk you through that. And as we go through this, please put your questions in the chat. We'll have time at the end. We really want to make sure we answer your questions. Caitlin?
Thanks, Tim. As mentioned, the user will access eForms through the eCase system. This will allow case information and claimant information to populate into the eForm once you select the form that you're going to use. The eForm wizard walks the user through what action is needed and what fields need to be completed in a few short steps. Like the paper form, there are three categories: compensation, medical, and other, consisting of multiple request reasons under each category. The user will select a request reason and complete the request details. Most request reasons will have a free-form text box that will allow the user to add additional information related to the reason. All data is validated immediately with errors returned on the screen in seconds to be corrected by the user. Once a reason is complete, the user can add another request reason if needed. After all the request reasons are added, the user will have the ability to reference documents already in the case folder or upload new supporting documentation. Even if a request reason doesn't require supporting documentation, you can still reference and upload the documents. The submitter is responsible for certification and notifying the appropriate parties. Upon successful submission, the e-form is immediately added to the case folder and routed automatically to the appropriate board staff for review and action. Now let's walk through an example. We'll be using the request reason payments directed by the board should be suspended pursuant to section 323B. The e-form will ask the user for the following request details. First, they'll select a decision that directs continuing payments. This will be in the case folder. And then they can select one of 9 sub-options, or at least one. You can also select multiple. Some example of sub-options are medical evidence finds no disability or fails to support ongoing disability. Claimant has voluntarily removed themselves from or is no longer attached to the labor market, and claimant beneficiary whereabouts are unknown. For each sub-option selected, the user will select another document from the case folder or additional data. The user can provide additional information related to the request reason if needed. This is all the information on the request details step. Once the request details steps is complete, the user can add another reason or move forward to complete the remaining e-form steps. The remaining e-form steps include additional proposed findings, supporting documentation, certification, and attestation. There are also reasons where there is minimal action taken on the request detail steps. For example, a user will select a request reason, and on the detail steps, all they do is enter into a free-form text box explaining some things or selecting a radio button option. It's super easy, very similar to like something you'd see with TurboTax. As you can see, the web app option via eCase is very simple and would only take a few minutes to complete. So now I'll hand it over to Pasha to provide a technical overview of the other 2 electronic submission options, the REST API and the sFTP. Pasha?
Thank you, Caitlin. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to cover technical overview of e-form submissions using REST API and sFTP process. First, I'm going to talk about submitting e-forms using REST API. So the information you're seeing on screen represents the technical steps and workflow that occur when submitting e-forms using REST API. To consume REST APIs, organizations need to meet the requirements as shown on screen. First, organizations need to register with the board to get access to e-forms REST API. After a successful registration, organizations will get client ID and secret to access REST APIs. So organizations can use the client ID and secret to generate access token by calling authorization API, and that access token can be used to call further APIs. Once the registration is completed, organizations need to complete a series of test scenarios in our test environment to finalize production access. Once the requirements are met, the organization's client application will submit the RFA-2 transaction in XML format to the board. The transaction will be accepted or rejected following a list of validations. In case of accepted transactions, the API will generate an RFA-2 PDF document for the case folder as part of acknowledgement. Submissions that do not pass validations will be marked as rejected with specific rejection reason. An acknowledgement record with reject and accepted status will be communicated to the client application through signal or notifications. The board will provide all the relevant documentation, including signal or client configurations. Next, I'm going to talk about submitting e-forms using sFTP process. Again, the information shown on screen represents the technical steps and workflow that occur when submitting e-forms using sFTP process. The process can be used for submitting bulk transactions. Like REST APIs, organizations need to register with the board to receive credentials to access sFTP location that is designated for each organization. After successful registration, like REST APIs, organizations need to complete a series of test scenarios in our test environment to finalize production access. This is to make sure whether the connectivity is good, you're able to access the sFTP location or not. Once the requirements are met, the organization's client application will submit RFA-2 transaction in XML format to the board. The board will process all the submissions contained in the uploaded XML file, including XML schema validation and functional validation checks. The submitted transactions will be marked as accepted, rejected, following validations. For each XML file submitted, a corresponding XML acknowledgement file is created and stored on our sFTP server in the designated folder for each organization. The XML acknowledgement file will contain acceptance and rejected statuses for each transaction. For accepted transaction, like in REST API, a PDF file will be generated for each RFA-2 submission and placed in the case folder. For rejected transactions, rejected reason will be updated in the acknowledgement file. That completes sFTP process. Next, Mike Hunter will give you an overview of the eForms data requirements and show a draft XML submission example. Mike.
Thanks, Pasha. The screen you see here is just a draft sample of the spreadsheet that's posted on our RFA-2 eForms page. That may be accessed by visiting the board's website. At the top of the page, you'll see an eForms option. Once you click on that, and you'll then be able to select RFA-2. And we do have a draft sample of our requirements posted out on the website currently. For those familiar with e-claims, as Tim mentioned earlier, very similar in that we have requirements if you're going to submit through API or sFTP. On this spreadsheet, there's various tabs. Instructions was very high level. Expectations. We do have a change log. Once we move from a draft to a permanent spreadsheet, we'll actually have those posted out there as we make changes, so you can track those easily and know what we update on a spreadsheet. We have a data elements, element requirement conditions, and element rules tabs. Those will outline the data elements that are there, the conditions for those, as well as any rules behind them. We also spell out any of the error codes and their corresponding text that you may see. Valid values is just that, the valid values for each of the various codes and elements that we have. We also provide you with a body part value, so you easily can reference body parts, as well as the state and country values as well. Now what we're going to do is actually walk you through a draft XML submission. So in this example here, you'll see case ID of 12345678. You'll have a submitter's name, the date of injury, the reason, ensure request to apply overpayment to ongoing payments, and some of the corresponding data, including the decision, filing date of decision or hearing that directed the payments, overpayment, yes or no, alleged overpayment amount, and the explanation. That'll be a free text field for you. You'll also, similar to the eCase app, in this case here, you'll need to know the document ID. You'll reference that document ID in the XML file, the form ID of deposition in this case, the received date of that document that's in eCase, as well as indicate if you have any other proposed findings in addition to applying for that overpayment. So now what I'll do is turn it over to Matthew, and he'll actually walk you through an actual XML file example.
Thank you, Mike. Hello all. I am Matthew Samuel. Brianna and myself are here from the eForms development team. So this is an example of an XML that you as a client sending the RFA-2 via the REST API route might use. If you examine the XML, there is a header section at the top where one of the things to be filled out is the client ID. This client ID is the same client ID that you receive when you register with the board. This is the client ID that is created by Okta and given to you, and it is registered with Akana. This value is validated within the eForms app to ensure that this matches with the client ID coming in as part of the auth token that Pasha mentioned a few slides back. Now, while testing, you may be building these manually, but typically as you work towards using the REST API route, this might become part of a workflow or software program that consumes the eForms REST API endpoints that the board has exposed. Next slide. Thank you. Now this next slide, this shows the same XML with the event section highlighted a bit more. So after the header section, which we looked at in the previous slide, is the event section. This slide shows how the example that Mike showed a few slides back translates into the XML. The top section here that is highlighted shows some of the key elements that need to be always filled in, like the WCB case ID and the date of injury broken up as shown. The transaction will be rejected if these key elements in the board's database do not match with what is filled in for these elements for this case. The next section is the reason node, where details related to the reason are added, like the code for the reason in the example. In the example, the decision is not listed and there is a date to be entered for this on the left side. On the left side in the XML, you see how they get filled in. Similarly, the overpayment details are filled in on the XML as shown. Down below, we see how a document from a case folder is referenced. In this case, the document with form ID deposition. This example has no additional proposed findings to be added. That must be specified using an element tag in the additional proposed findings section as shown. Next slide, please. Now, throughout these, you will use the XML template that is published on the website to get the right XML tag names and to build the XML structure, while using the XSD to recognize the constraints and rules for each of the values. Now, in this slide, in the last slide, we saw certain codes getting used. For example, the reason code was CPI. Where do we get these codes from? Again, we refer to the EDI spreadsheet that Mike Hunter showed us a few slides ago, and which is also published on the website. That's from where you learn to put C for reason category, which stands for compensation. That's also where you get the form ID of deposition from, as shown in the example, or the values to put in the certification section, which can be one of NOST or NORS. When we use eCase and the web app to fill out each section step by step, this XML gets built in the background. The difference when we use the REST API route to send the data is that we need to know these codes beforehand to build the XML data correctly ourselves to send in the payload. Hence, knowing the XML template and the XSD well is key in this process. Next slide, please. There are certain mandatory sections within the XML which you will need to fill, else the transaction will be rejected, like the attestation section, the additional proposed finding section, which is shown third on the slide. The supporting documents section, which is where you will fill in a valid document ID and details from the case folder, or you can fill in details of a document to be uploaded to the case folder and attach the actual document, but in base 64 format. Only JPEG and PDF files are currently allowed. This section is mandatory for some RFA-2 reasons and not needed for other reasons, like the CPD. One thing to note is the document ID, etc. details that are entered will be validated by eForms to ensure that these are appropriate for the case. And if the validation fails, the transaction will be rejected. Another section that is mandatory for RFA-2 reasons, for certain RFA-2 reasons, while not needed for others, and there are rules defined in the EDI document for these, is the certification section. Next slide, please. Finally, when you have created the XML as per the specifications allowed in the XML template and the XSD, you will send it to the REST API endpoint, where, as mentioned before, if it does not pass all the validations, it will be rejected. But after all validations pass, it will be accepted. And as Pasha showed a few slides ago in his architectural diagram, in either case, whether the transaction is rejected or accepted, an acknowledgement will be sent to the client using SignalR notification API. Now this requires a SignalR client to be set up at your end, and we will publish documents and sample code regarding how to do this. And there is also documentation available how to set this up using different technologies that is available online. Our team will also work closely with you to set this up on your end. Anyway, the acknowledgement containing information regarding an accepted transaction or reasons for rejection will be contained in the acknowledgement XML that is sent back to the client. This slide shows the structure of this acknowledgement XML. At the top, as seen, the sender information will be shown, followed by the transaction related information like WCB case ID, the transaction sequence number, and the submission ID, which is an ID generated by eForms. The submission status will indicate whether the transaction was accepted or rejected. If accepted, the form image element will hold the PDF representation of the accepted RFA-2 transaction, like Pasha mentioned, in base 64 format. This will also be saved in the case folder. However, if the transaction was rejected, the errors section will give details of the errors that caused the rejection so that you can correct the data and resubmit. I will now hand it back to Ali, who will go over the next steps and available resources. Ali.
Thank you, Matthew. So what's next? And as a reminder, please put your questions in the chat. We are ready and available to answer those. Okay, so what's next? As previously mentioned, subject number 046-1715 was issued on September 12th, 2024, announcing the upcoming electronic submission mandate for the RFA-2. Another subject number will be released once the official implementation date is established, and we will provide this subject number at least 4 weeks before implementation. The electronic submission mandate for the RFA-2 is estimated to go live in Q1 of next year. The board will continue posting technical instructions and documentation and make stakeholders aware of these resources as they become available. Stakeholders can prepare for this mandate by deciding what submission option you will use, and if using API or sFTP, preparing your applications based on board documentation and working within test windows to validate the submissions. If you're opting to file RFA-2 eForms via eCase, the process is very simple and will not require any testing or additional registration steps. And if you're planning to use sFTP or the REST API electronic submission options, closely monitor and review our XML technical instructions and documentation that will continue to be updated throughout this year. Prep your own application software based on board XML documentation and conduct mandatory formal testing with the board in early 2026. So the eForms webpage is what's up here on the slide. This site, get to there if you don't have the link. I'm also going to paste the link in the chat again. So right up on the board's website on the top header, if you navigate to the eForms page, which is next to the forms, click that link, and if you scroll toward the bottom, there will be the RFA-1 LC and the RFA-2. You will want to select the RFA-2. And keep up to date on that page because we will be updating it frequently as more information and requirements become available. So to wrap up, we want to leave you with some resources should you have any questions or feedback after our session ends today. For questions related to the eForm and electronic submission options, please email eforms@wcb.ny.gov. We also encourage you to check out the board's onboard webpage for more information and resources regarding the whole program, including walkthroughs of the registration process and recorded training presentations. All right, so with that, that concludes our presentation portion of the session. Please feel free to put any questions in the chat, and we look forward to answering them. But we'll just go on mute for a couple of minutes as people get their questions in, and we'll be right back.
Hi, folks. We do have a couple questions that just came in. I'll start with the question regarding, is it possible that this is going to extend to other forms like the C8.1s using this technology? The answer is yes. We do not yet have the future forms identified in terms of what ones will come next, but part of our overall strategy, as I said when we kicked off, is to eventually and incrementally over time replace paper forms with this technology. So the answer to that is yes. There's a question on response files. Whether you're using the API, which will be a payload that comes back as our team here described, or sFTP, it won't be once per day, it'll be more frequent. Our plan is if someone were to send us, for example, an sFTP file containing multiple RFA-2 submissions, we would process that immediately, given our bandwidth in terms of during the day processing that or at night. And once that process is done, immediately generate the file and make it available for you to pick up on the sFTP server.
Okay, so that looks like that's all the questions we have. We just want to thank you again for joining us today. eforms@wcb.ny.gov should you have any further questions. The recording will be coming to you shortly, and we hope you have a great day. Thanks for joining us.